As election 2016 degenerates from clownish buffoonery masking tragic depths of dysfunction to even more clownish buffoonery masking even more deeply tragic, deeper depths of even more dysfunction, many people have begun asking some very important questions. Where can I catch the next bus back to the 1950s? Will socialism come to America, or can we just go to Venezuela and starve to death there? And after you've called someone a conservative, globalist, cosmopolitan, deep state neocon, have you run out of synonyms for Jew? But perhaps the question troubling voters the most is, have journalists in the mainstream media become such corrupt, mendacious Democrat hacks determined to deceive and hoodwink the public by replacing the honest truth with a wholly delusional narrative that they have sanitized Hillary Clinton's obvious criminality while depriving Donald Trump of a fair chance to get his message out? Or is Trump just kind of a schmo? Trump says it's the fault of the press. He told the Daily Wire, quote, "I have been totally victimized by a corrupt news media that has given me billions of dollars worth of free coverage so everyone can see what a total blockhead I am. I haven't spent any money on advertising, so if the crooked media had simply not covered me, then no one would know what I was like and I would win by a landslide." So much of what the media reports is utterly and completely untrue, like saying that Ted Cruz's father helped assassinate President Kennedy. What sort of total idiot would believe nonsense like that? But suddenly, when it comes to me, they start telling the truth, which makes me look like some sort of total idiot. It's just not fair, unquote. Hillary Clinton was interviewed about media fairness by ABC's chief political correspondent, George Stephanopoulos, who peppered her with tough questions, including, "Are you comfortable, my darling? Can I get you anything? Is that coffee too cold? Would you like me to make you another cup? And can't we end this farce and simply declare our love to the world?" Mrs. Clinton's answers were yes, yes, a little, okay, and quiet, you passionate fool, Huma will hear you. Though not necessarily in that order. Stephanopoulos did finally ask Mrs. Clinton about the rumors that her health is failing. Mrs. Clinton answered by falling down a flight of stairs, coughing up a bloody hairball, and then spasming uncontrollably for several minutes, after which she responded, quote, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm as Wheatfield as an electric blanket under cosmic tinker toys." The incident was reported in the New York Times, a former newspaper, under the headline, "Sexist Republicans Claim a Woman is Not Strong Enough to be President While She's Suffering from a Massive Brain Tumor." But whether the news media are corrupt and Donald Trump is a buffoon, or whether Donald Trump is a buffoon and it's the news media that's corrupt, there are some things that are certain. Donald Trump is a buffoon and the news media are corrupt, and Hillary Clinton is a flaming crapstick. So the election continues on its usual course. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show. All right, that's day one without cracking up in my own monologue. All right. By the way, we've been hearing some complaints, besides your complaints like you're an idiot, you're all these things. You're a terrible person where you spell your, Y-O-U-R. Stop doing that. It's Y-O-U''re. If you're going to insult me, I insist on proper grammar. But we have been hearing your complaints about the sound quality, and we are working around the clock on this. Something about my mellifluous, velvety voice doesn't always travel, and possibly the fact that I move around a lot makes the microphone not as effective as it should be. But we do hear you, and we are. You may not hear us, but we hear you, and we are working on it. All right. Okay, so we're on Facebook for 15 minutes. Enjoy it while you can, and then it will be snatched away from you, and you have to come to the Daily Wire to hear the rest, or you can get us on iTunes or SoundCloud. And you must subscribe because tomorrow is Mailbag Day. Hey, it's Mailbag Day, and you cannot be in the mailbag if you don't subscribe. It's a lousy $8 a month. What are you waiting for? I mean, how cheap are you really? Okay. All right, so Donald Trump, who you may remember from our last show, we actually didn't talk about Donald Trump yesterday all that much, which was such a relief. I don't know. But he took some time out between periods of sticking his foot in his mouth and tripping over his tongue and falling over himself. He took some time out to make what I thought was a very fine speech about fighting ISIS. I mean, I would give it an A-, and I am a tough grader. So, I mean, it's not to say it's an A- doesn't mean that I'm taking anything away from it. I thought it had some flaws in it, as his philosophy has some flaws in it, but it was really strong stuff. And he started out, the thing that I really liked about it is he started out right away and framed this as a war of ideas. He started out by saying in the 20th century, the United States defeated fascism, Nazism, and communism. Now a different threat challenges our world, radical Islamic terrorism. And he went on to talk about the way Ronald Reagan posed the Cold War, the fight with the Soviet Union, as a fight of ideologies. And if you remember back in those days, that was just as untenable to the media and the left as it is to talk about radical Islam. When Ronald Reagan said the Soviet Union is an evil empire, the press went nuts. He was a warmonger, he was an idiot, he was a buffoon, he was a jingoist patriot. So now Trump harkens back to those days. Play number one.
In winning the Cold War, President Ronald Reagan repeatedly touted the superiority of freedom over communism and called the USSR the evil empire. Yet when President Obama delivered his address in Cairo, no such moral courage could be found or would be found. Instead of condemning the oppression of women and gays in many Muslim nations, and the systematic violations of human rights or the financing of global terrorism, President Obama tried to draw an equivalency between our human rights record, and remember this, our human rights and theirs. The records are unbelievable and unmistakable. His naive words were followed by even more naive actions. The failure to establish a new status of forces agreement in Iraq and the election-driven timetable for withdrawal surrendered our gains in that country and led directly to the rise of ISIS.
Fact check true, all true. Trump is always at his best when he's diagnosing the problem. He's always at his best when he's calling out people for the mistakes they've made. Always weaker when he starts to propose his own programs, especially when it gets down to details, especially when he gets into that I alone can solve nonsense. I mean, this is a complex problem. To fight a war that is an ideological war, but is not against a nation state is a very, very difficult thing to do. This is a poison that reaches out into our country, that reaches out through computer screens, it reaches out through ideas, through YouTube, and captures people. And, President Obama falsely calls these lone wolf attackers. They're not lone wolf attackers. They're people who have caught this disease. An idea is like a disease, sometimes for good or ill, sometimes for good. A good idea can make people healthier and spread around the world, spread to people. The idea of freedom. Remember when America started, it was the only republic on earth. And now, everybody, even if you're a bad country, you have to call yourself a republic. That's because of the success of the United States of America. That's a good idea spreading. The bad idea is Islam, and Trump is absolutely right. He's absolutely right in his diagnosis of what Obama did wrong. He left out the fact that Obama sat around while Syria went up in flames, drawing his red line that he never drew. I didn't draw the red line, but I draw a red line, but I don't draw a red line, that kind of stuff. He left that out, but that's okay. He really did get it. Now, so then he goes on and he talks about his opposition to the Iraq war, and it's political nonsense, but I would say it's the kind of nonsense we expect from our politicians. The Iraq war is now unpopular. Trump did at one point say that he thought this was a waste of time. It was for nothing. It obviously was not for nothing. It obviously had a point and purpose. Saddam Hussein was a terrible, terrible human being. He was doing terrible things. He was funding terrorism in the region. The question of whether he had weapons of mass destruction, I mean, we know he had some weapons of mass destruction, but it does seem that he didn't have the program that people thought he might have been developing when he continually kept inspectors out. But he did continually keep inspectors out, parading himself. Not a bad thing that Donald Trump, not a bad thing that Saddam Hussein is gone. But the war, I feel, was just badly run. That George W. Bush, because of his loyalties to his staff, let them go on before he had that surge. And when he finally stood up for his own vision of the thing and had the surge, he won the war. That's what he's talking about. That is what when Obama didn't negotiate a status of forces agreement, that's what Trump is talking about. Obama let that victory go. And whether or not we should have been in the war, and we certainly should have financed the war, which we didn't. We allowed the war to just tack itself onto the debt. Whether we should have gone in that war The war was won when Obama took office. No Americans were being killed the month before he took office, and he just abandoned that territory. And there's just no question about that. So Trump is right. Okay, so now he phrases this thing as a battle of ideas, and now he puts forward a sort of, I won't call it a specific plan, but an idea of a coalition fight, and he sort of takes back, he reframes, we'll say, his opposition to NATO and his criticism of NATO by saying NATO has essentially responded to it.
We cannot always choose our friends, but we can never fail to recognize our enemies. As president, I will call for an international conference focused on this goal. We will work side by side with our friends in the Middle East, including our greatest ally, Israel. We will partner with King Abdullah of Jordan and the President of Egypt, President Sisi, and all others who recognize this ideology of death that must be extinguished. We will also work very closely with NATO on this new mission. I had previously said that NATO was obsolete because it failed to deal adequately with terrorism. Since my comments, they have changed their policy and now have a new division focused on terror threats. Very good. Very, very good.
I always love those Trumpisms. Very good, very good. Now, I just want you to notice, though, that he talked about working with moderate Muslim states and moderate Muslim people, once again framing this as a war of ideas, which unquestionably is what it is. And compare that to what Obama was doing yesterday. Yesterday, the U.S. transferred 15 Guantanamo Bay detainees to the United Arab Emirates on the largest such movement of prisoners yet, and President Barack Obama's push to remove most prisoners from the offshore prison before he leaves office in January. So this is this place we have on our territory, offshore, basically, on Cuba, offshore U.S. territory, where we can house these monsters without putting them back into the system, without putting them back on the battlefield, without giving them over to Muslim states. Obama is obsessed with emptying this thing out because he said he would do it. He wants to do everything that he said he would do. It doesn't matter to him, just like he surged in Afghanistan for no reason, just as he got our troops killed in Afghanistan for absolutely no benefit. He is living in this fantasy. We'll try to get back to his ideology in a moment, but he does not understand, because of his own ideology, he does not understand that he is opposing an ideology, and he doesn't know what ideology he's opposing because he's thinking he's playing a different game. He's playing a game of chess. They say he's so smart. He's playing 16-dimensional chess. He is, but he's playing it by himself, and doesn't know who's on the other side of those 16 dimensions. So this is the thing about Trump that I really liked about this speech. It was all about ideas. It was not about demonizing persons. It was not about playing to that section of Trump's base that wants to hear the rage, that wants to hear the hatred, that wants to hear, these guys are awful, we've got to do something about this. He actually was phrasing it in terms of ideas. Even when he got to the part that made all the headlines, which is about immigration. Because this is his crowd-pleasing stuff. This is the stuff people want to hear. We're not going to have Syrians being, dumped on us. We're not going to have, after all, this crisis in Syria is Obama's fault to some degree, or at least his responsibility, to have all these people who have been shipped into Germany, who are now molesting their women, to have them all shipped in here without any kind of vetting procedure. That's not fair. They do vet them, but without proper vetting procedures. And why so many, and how can we accommodate them without ever thinking about those questions? So Trump gets to this, but again, he puts it in terms of ideas, and this is what got all the headlines.
In the Cold War, we had an ideological screening test. The time is overdue to develop a new screening test for the threats we face today. I call it extreme vetting. I call it extreme vetting. Our country has enough problems We don't need more. And these are problems like we've never had before. In addition to screening out all members of the sympathizers of terrorist groups, we must also screen out any who have hostile attitudes toward our country or its principles, or who believe that Sharia law should supplant American law. Those who do not believe in our Constitution or who support bigotry and hatred will not be admitted for immigration into our country.
Okay, we're going to vet this in just a second. We have to say goodbye to our friends at Facebook, so bring on the dancing girls. Now all the fun begins, but you can hear the rest of the Daily Wire.